Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Lussman. I'm a partner with DLA Piper, and I head up our Israel country group based in Tel Aviv. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon or this morning from wherever you're joining us. It's a real privilege for us to be collaborating again and working so closely with our dear friends at Yigal Arnon, with Simon, with Tamar, with Noah. We have a dear friendship, a very close collaboration over many years of working together on various client matters, and we've had the real zchut and opportunity over the last many years of doing various programs together, finding areas of connection and collaboration where we see a real interest, where our clients collaboratively are engaged in a particular area of legal need or particular sector. And you know, this is certainly no exception, and even beyond that, this seems to be a topic of dealing with digital health, which is so front and center on our minds generally, but of course during this very harsh period of time that we've all been dealing with Corona and COVID-19, and just in the midst of and pre-Corona, post-Corona, in the midst of Corona, and we don't know where we are, unfortunately, and every jurisdiction is dealing with it in its own way. Here in Israel right now, unfortunately, we're in a really hard time. The country just announced another lockdown that's going to be starting towards the end of the week for another 3 weeks, and so there's a lot of angst and a real hard feeling here this week. And I know thankfully in the States that in many areas and many jurisdictions, life seems to be slowly getting back to a little bit more of a normalized situation. We hope that that continues. But you know, the aspects of dealing with health in the midst of Corona and figuring out the right technologies and figuring out the right ways of bringing medicine and health to the patient in the world that we're in right now is, you know, couldn't be more sacred and crucial. And so this really is beyond the topic that should be dealt with front and center. And so we're privileged to welcome you all today to discuss that. I'm thrilled to welcome my partner, Danny Toby, who is a close friend. When Danny joined DLA a couple of years back, he just coincidentally, timing-wise, happened to have taken a trip to Israel right at the very beginning of his time with the firm, and I had the privilege of hosting him with my family for a Friday night dinner, which was really just such a special meal and a special engagement with him, and we really have become close friends. And we've been looking for an opportunity for a while to continue the engagement on the U.S.-Israel healthcare front, and it's a real privilege to welcome him here. And again, thrilled to be doing this together with our dear friends at Yigal Arnon. I'm going to turn the floor over to Simon, who's going to moderate the panel together with Tamar, Danny, and Doron. And I also just wanted to thank everyone who worked on this event, you know, which took a lot of time and effort and coordination, Naomi and ZC on our front, and Noah and her team on the Yigal Arnon front. Again, we don't take your efforts for granted, and we really appreciate it very much. So without further ado, Simon, I'll hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're listening from. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to our webinar on digital health trends during the Corona period. My name is Simon Weintraub. I'm a corporate partner in the MedTech practice group at Yigal Arnon based in Tel Aviv. I'm very honored and pleased to be here with our good friends from DLA Piper, who are co-sponsoring this event with us. Thank you, Naomi and Zissi, for organizing together with Nirit and Noah on our end, and thank you, Jeremy, of course. While the current state of the Israeli economy is very shaky, and there's an element of fear in the air with the impending second lockdown about to be imposed, notwithstanding the fact that 2020 is proving to be a record-breaking year for Israeli technology startup companies, particularly in the healthcare space. While in North America, high-tech investment is down 10% compared to 2019 in the first half, and while in Europe, we've seen a 20% reduction, surprisingly in Israel, we've seen a 40% increase compared to the first half of 2019. While the overall deals in 2020 have decreased in number, there's a large increase in check size, and especially in the amounts being invested in later stage rounds. There's no question that the medtech industry has benefited from the global concern for healthcare and our wellness in general. We're noticing a large increase this year in investments in digital health, as well as wellness companies. We are fortunate here today to have some of the leading global experts in the area of digital health as it relates to law and regulation. Our first speaker is Tamar Tavori from Yigal Arnon, who will be followed by Danny Toby, a partner from DLA Piper, and finally by Doron Bahar, who will provide some insight from an industry perspective. We hope to also have some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions for our specific panelists or for our panelists in general, please feel free to write to us during the course of the presentations, and we'll do our best to accommodate at the end of the presentations. Our first speaker is Tamar Tavori. She has recently joined our firm as special counsel in the area of healthcare. Tamar served for 20 years in senior positions in the Advocate General's office in the Israeli Defense Forces. Tamar specializes in Israel's healthcare system, its regulation, is an expert regarding the unique issues of digital health, including telehealth, AI in medicine, medical research, and secondary use of medical data in clinical trials. She's currently teaching a health law course in the MA INBAR program in the Faculty of Management at Tel Aviv University. All yours, Tamar. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. I'll just share the screen so we could talk as we see the presentation. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here and talk about artificial intelligence in medicine, and specifically about the legal aspect. It's a topic I'm very enthusiastic about. And I'd like to start with 2 or 3 examples of the power of artificial intelligence. And one I encountered recently was about the use of AI in critical care unit, where patients are being monitored, and the AI system managed to identify changes in their medical condition and alert the critical care unit staff and tell them just before they deteriorate. And another one that really helps in life-threatening situation was an AI system that goes over CT angiograms and identifies early signs of stroke, also alerting critical care unit and telling them once, or ER unit, and telling them when a patient really needs immediate healthcare. And I think that putting AI in such life-threatening situation shows and demonstrates really how AI promotes healthcare and better healthcare than we know it today. We also see it in day-to-day places where I think we never thought a computer can go before. And a great example, in my opinion, is the one in mental health care, in which I saw this AI chatbot that talks, if I may say that word, talks to a person, and through AI and natural language process technique manages to identify certain mental health situation and direct the patient to the right solution. So it's, I think, the closest thing to empathy, or computer showing empathy, that could really we could see nowadays. And with these amazing examples of AI, the question is why we lawyers have to spoil this perfect image and talk about legal aspects of artificial intelligence. And that's not because we're mean and nasty, I mean that too, but there are certain aspects, and I think especially now with the effect of COVID-19 and with, you know, the general idea that legislation and regulation are quite behind technology, is that there's less regulation of artificial intelligence than can be expected. And I think in time, we will see that it evolves and there will be more regulation. And I think we better prepare for it also from a business perspective, knowing where the products are heading to on the regulatory perspective. So we're going to touch very briefly in artificial intelligence, some common terms, about privacy, just a couple of words, because you can't talk about artificial intelligence without privacy. And the main issue is really the special characteristics of AI and how we're going to deal with them legally. So artificial intelligence is, I put here on the slide, a common definition, but it's really the way that computers can mimic a person's conduct or a person's acts. And if they say that something that looks to you like an intelligent task, that if it would have been committed by a person. So definitely when it is done so by a computer, and I'll remind you Meir Shalev's definition for intelligent as an asymptomatic disease, which is also should be in our mind. So artificial intelligence is mainly based on two main factors. One is computerized information, lots and lots of computerized digital health information. And I think we all know that Israel is very known to have that. And also, of course, very advanced algorithmic capabilities that were developed in the recent years. So with these two factors, artificial intelligence is going further. And here just as a slide with some of the great AI examples from COVID-19 crisis demonstrated lately. It's from the OECD. And we see here detecting the disease itself or the pandemics by checking, monitoring early signs, and treating better patients by identifying high-risk patients of COVID-19 and alerting them, or by just bettering the healthcare treatment itself. Of course, clinical trials, examinations of the virus and of the vaccines are heavily relying on AI tools. And so with all of that, the question is, again, with all of the good things that AI brings to our lives, why are we worried? So, and social scoring and the power of prediction is definitely stressed in this movie. So without being too pessimistic, we're going to check the main legal challenges of artificial intelligence. And the first one, as I mentioned, we'll really touch it briefly, is privacy. And privacy, I think, is a notion that everybody agrees on. No one thinks that you can live without. And if before in the past, privacy was, the right to be left alone. It was something of the state versus the person. You didn't want anyone to go into your house and see what you have there. Today, you don't need to get someone into your house. Your house will tell all about you because all of your bills, all of your appliances, everything you do is already Internet of Things, everything reports, and the things that are not reported automatically for efficiency, you might want to share yourself with your so-called friends or social networks. So really, I think the question is to be asked if there is a notion of privacy anymore. And my daughter, who always wants to upload videos to TikTok against my permission, argues that there isn't anymore. But I think that as privacy becomes more and more something that we worry about, people really discover the value of it. And when we have an AI product or AI development, we really need to see how to get to the information that we need. And medical information is something that has based on trust and medical confidentiality, I think is widely agreed to be the base of good medical treatment and, of course, of public health. And because of that, approaching medical health information, and I think in general, all the most intimate and difficult details of a person's life are there, I think it's understood that you need to find a way to do it in a way that keeps and guards his or her privacy. And really, the Ministry of Health in Israel issued guidance concerning secondary use of data, which in general words, I'll just say that it enables you two main pathways. One is to achieve person's consent, and the other is to go through a process of de-identification. I won't go through the details, but it's a really professional process with an approval of a statistician. So these are the two ways. And I'll also mention that also the idea of consent gets criticized a lot because nowadays digital consent is all over us. We all click, I agree, I agree. I just saw an article talking about how long does it take us to read terms of use or privacy policy, and it all ran, it's things that we all do and applications we all use in our day-to-day lives, and it was about a quarter of an hour till half an hour of reading. So I assume that we don't all read them. So these are the difficulties and challenges we had with privacy. But as I mentioned before, we want to focus a little more on the special characteristic of artificial intelligence. And here's a caricature that you can read, but in general it says artificial intelligence can make mistakes, and it might do so because historical data is not always perfect as we would like to think. And the main challenge, I think, is really the challenge of bias. A very known example is of Janet Hill, the wife of Steve Wozniak, a co-founder of Apple. When they issued a credit card of Apple and Goldman Sachs, she received 10% of the credit score that her husband received. Both had the same assets, same bank accounts, and the reason was supposed to be a problem with the algorithm. Of course, it's a sort of a gender bias. And another example that I saw like almost a year ago was published in Nature, and that was AI in medicine, when artificial intelligence was supposed to allocate healthcare patients to healthcare plans, and it allocated them in a way that cannot be called otherwise than systematically racist, and it actually did not refer Black patients as it did to white patients. And that was just almost a year ago in the US after the system was deployed in many hospitals. So we see there's a problem, and also it doesn't have to be a problem of discrimination. It could be just a mistake or a faulty assumption. There was a research about patients with pneumonia getting to the hospital, and the AI system was supposed to decide if the patient is supposed to be hospitalized or to go back home with medication. And it decided that asthma, sick people with asthma that had pneumonia do not need to be hospitalized, which is was just like a mistake, because the database did not include asthma patients for any reason. So these mistakes can happen, and I think we need to bear in mind, and we need to be aware of the possible problems in the database, and also we need to remember the medical database for itself is problematic. We all know that from a gender perspective, medical research was based on male physiques, and ignoring somewhat the special characteristic of women's physiology and health. And that's a good reason to suspect or to check before deploying an AI system. So what solutions are we talking about? Transparency is talked as the main solution, as a key factor, and everything that has to do with bias in databases and the way to expose bias. And we'll talk about it a little more while we mention explainability in a second. So the next challenge of artificial intelligence is really the black box issue. The black box is a name that is supposed to define a problem with the causality between the input and the output. For example, if I have an input, a medical information, medical database about a disease, about a certain patient, that would be the input, and then the output would be the diagnosis, the prediction, and sometimes the AI would have an amazing insight for why a certain prediction should be, or certain insight should be the solution for a person's problem, but we as humans, or even the physicians or the medical institution, would not be able to track down the logic, the causality between the input and the output. And this puts I think both medical institutions and lawyers in a question mark. How can you recommend a solution even if you think it's great if you can't explain how it works? And just to make things a little more complicated, so when the algorithm is a learning algorithm and it keeps changing, it might even change in the process, it might change the answer to the question, because it keeps learning and it keeps evolving. So that is also a thing to be wondering about. And the solution we talk about, when we talk about explainable AI, which is something that appears a lot nowadays in writing, I think we talk about algorithmic explainability and algorithmic explanation of the artificial intelligence, to be able to write the explanation, to document it, to explain it. And I don't know about you, the non-engineers among you, but me, when someone explains me about an algorithm, I don't understand much as a lawyer. So I think it is clear that there will be some level of explaining that will be very professional, very algorithmic, that developers and experts outside of the company, maybe of the regulator, will be able to examine, and by this find out more about the causality or even identify bias. And there will be another type of explanation that will be for plain users, for patients, for more common people. Another thing they talk about is supervision and monitoring, because it is clear that in such a situation, you cannot just let the AI work on its own. So a little bit more about the challenges ahead of us. One main one is the relationship between physician and patient and AI. And we understand that if the AI system has a recommendation, let's say, it found an abnormality in a photo, in an image, in a CT scan, and the physician needs to decide what to do with it or what would be its recommendation. And we understand that in time, as now the AI serves as a decision support tool, in time the physician would become more and more happy to rely on the AI system and its outcome because the AI system would be just so good. And in such a case, there will be questions to be asked: can the AI work autonomously? Can the doctor activate his discretion independently? Does he work independently when he just looks at the AI and decides to accept its reference? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And just towards the end, to mention an important issue that we're all talking about nowadays is really the question of regulation. So AI is regulated in a way that is only through medical device. So when you have an AI embedded in medical device or in software as medical device, you have to go through FDA or EU MDR and answer the qualifications. But if it's not exactly, or if you have several other questions, so regulation is really incomplete. And I think the main issue here that you see many AI guidance, practical, non-binding guidance, issued by both US and EU bodies like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, or the European Commission, talking about how AI should be regulated, talking about explainability and transparency, and some other issues that we'll won't be able to touch because of shortage of time. And this is something that I think that as long as it's out there as guidance, even if it's practical and non-binding and non-directly relates to medicine, we will have to, or we will see it coming by to medical regulation. And for last point, I will just mention that AI system really challenges the traditional legal definition of liability and tort law, the terms that we lawyers are used to talk about, causality and predictability, or the reasonable physician. They are all with great question marks once AI system is in a picture. And these are all challenges that we will all have to deal with. And as for the last sentence, I will say, like someone famous once said, with great power comes great responsibility, and we really have to prepare ourselves for challenges in the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamar, for that really, really interesting talk. Our second speaker is Danny Toby, a partner from the Dallas office of DLA Piper. Danny Toby is a medical doctor and software entrepreneur who represents life science technology and healthcare clients in a variety of regulatory and litigation matters. In 2019, Danny received the Burden Award from the Library of Congress, recognizing the best of the best writers in the legal profession among the nation's top 1,000 largest law firms. Danny is a graduate of Harvard College, Yale Law School, and UT Southwestern Medical School. Danny advised the American Medical Association on its 2019 policy on AI and medical liability, and was invited to present at the inaugural AI Ethics and Society Conference sponsored by Google and IBM. He has co-chaired the Judiciary Committee and the Membership and Admissions Committee of the Dallas Bar Association, and sits on the Governing Council of its Business Litigation Section. Danny previously served on the Executive Committee of the Yale Law School. All yours, Danny.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that very overly kind introduction. Tamara, thank you for a fascinating speech on AI and the law, an area that I know you and I both have a lot of interest in, and look forward to working with you for years to come on that topic as it evolves. Jeremy, thank you for reminding me of that wonderful experience of staying at your home for Shabbat 2 years ago. To all my friends in Israel, I was actually supposed to be there again this month. So obviously that will not be happening, but I will look forward to better times ahead where we can all be in the same room together doing this the old-fashioned way. But for now we have Zoom, and that's not a terrible segue to the topic, which I will be talking about, which is the trends in the US healthcare market as a result of COVID-19. And I will switch to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Hopefully people can see this. Someone will tell me if not, perhaps, but can you see the slides changing?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes,
Great.
we can see.
Okay, terrific. So I'll talk about the U.S. market trends in a post-COVID-19 world. And what I'll say is, as terrible as the current events are and the ongoing struggle, this has been a good time for digital health to prove itself as a tool that can help people. And there have been a number of regulatory changes and dispensations in just the last few months, enabling patients to take better use of telemedicine and other types of digital health. And I think the big question that all of us in the healthcare sector are wondering is how many of these will remain after the current crisis is over. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I know we have an audience focused in part on investment and would like to think about trends in that regard, you know, what's temporary versus what will remain. And so we'll try and touch on a little bit of what we see. The high growth areas empirically that we're noticing in the last few months are the contactless ones, if I can summarize it that way. So we are seeing much focus on behavioral health, dermatology, opioid addiction and treatment, facility-based care, that one's a little counterintuitive, but we'll talk about it, rural care, and home health or post-acute care. Now, this list is empirical, so it's a bit of a mishmash of causes. Some of them, you can see why they might be areas of high value right now. Dermatology, for example, is something that translates more easily to telemedicine and digital health than, say, something like surgery or internal medicine, where either hands-on patients or large diagnostic imaging modalities like X-ray or MRI or CT scan are a necessary part of the process. If you're looking at what to cancel and what to keep in terms of elective healthcare, dermatology is something where you can snap a picture and send it off to your doctor without having to go out into the world. So we're seeing a lot of emphasis on that and other areas where you can make contactless sort of start to stop of the encounter in many respects. Opioid addiction and treatment, that is a pre-COVID trend that we see continuing. Some of the supportive care and things can occur through telemedicine and telehealth and continue on. Facility-based care, this is a pre-COVID trend, obviously, but with the shock to the system for nursing homes, where people are no longer to visit in nursing homes, and we're seeing people being separated from families, there is an increased interest on what do our facility-based care options look like, the quality of care, and how you can interact with your loved ones who are in those places when you are not physically able to go and visit them on a day-to-day basis. Rural care is of interest. The boon in telemedicine, which I'll talk about a little bit in the wake of COVID, has expanded access to care in a number of ways, particularly in reaching people who otherwise are separated from city centers and major metropolitan health systems. And then home health and post-acute care, one-on-one home health visits. That is an ongoing trend in the United States that continues to be a growth area that we see. So what are the key market drivers? Obviously, cost savings and convenience. Provider shortages in the United States continue to be a driver as the economics of healthcare have changed, not just with COVID, but before COVID. Fewer and fewer people go to medical school. Many of them focus on remunerative areas that are hyper-specialized. So what we're seeing is a real crunch on access to especially primary care support for patients, and long wait lists Many other providers are switching to what we call concierge care, which is I'm sure most of you know this already, but for those who haven't heard that phrase, it is a pay-for-play system that takes open private practices and makes them a annual fee or monthly fee model, which allows the physician to shrink the size of the patient practice and spend more time and give more focused attention to a smaller pool of patients. That's also contributing to a provider shortage. I think if you talk to your friends in the United States, most of them now may have had the experience, or many of them may have had the experience of getting that letter from their longtime primary care doctor saying, I'm converting to a concierge practice. Would you like to be in, or would you like to find someone new? Regulatory shifts, obviously most dramatically in the recent wake of COVID, but there have been a number of waivers and other changes that have loosened up regulations around digital health. I won't go through all of them, but for those of you who would like to hear just a couple examples, CMS, our Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which deal with reimbursement in the United States and to providers, recently announced that there would be parity in reimbursements and payments between in-person visits and digital telehealth visits. And that is for all diagnoses, not just COVID-related diagnoses. There have been other dispensations, including a physician need not be licensed in the same state as the patient in order to provide a telehealth service. So those sorts of loosening of prior regulation have led to an explosion of telehealth services and also market entrants. And we all, those of us who monitor this, wonder once these interstate physician-patient relationships are formed, will CMS really tighten or take those away after this is over? In some cases, may be harder to do than others. So we think some of these may be long-term changes in access to care. At least we're hopeful. And then, of course, coronavirus itself and social distancing are driving contactless and digital and remote services of all types in healthcare. So text-heavy slide, but I'll just take you through a high level of it. This crisis has highlighted the importance of patient access. It's made an already challenging environment for patient access to care even more challenging. As you know, hospitals in the United States have had during the crisis to pull back on elective medical procedures. Many people have postponed annual or regularly scheduled but highly important procedures like colonoscopies and mammography, so important screening and detection. That is both a loss of revenue for the healthcare system that's at the same time spending a lot of funds trying to treat COVID. It also foretells a coming glut of more urgent cases as people present with, unfortunately, higher stage disease for things that weren't screened or detected earlier on. So American Medical Association, many other provider groups are very laser focused on mitigating that unfortunate secondary effect of COVID. We have seen in the United States, and I think around the world, that there is intrinsic bias and systemic bias all throughout the healthcare system, and that has been magnified in a way that's made it indisputable and hard to overlook across economic and racial and other socioeconomic lines in disparate impact of COVID on minority and lower income populations. So I think that we will see an increased emphasis on equity and access to care in the United States. Obviously, we have a big election coming up, and so there's uncertainty about that. But depending on which way that goes, there will be more attention on access and parity in healthcare. And I think technology and digital health will play a very constructive role in that. Increasingly complex reimbursement arrangements, as you all know, the US system is very decentralized, and we have a fragmented billing system where you may get multiple bills for one point of service, one event. And that is leading to a pressure for technological solutions to systematize, repackage into a sensible way our fractured billing system. Value-based care, we could give a whole talk on that, but that is a hoped for solution to some of our cost containment issues in the United States. And I have a number of technology clients who are focused on how do we use technology to actually enable value-based contracts. Value-based contracts in the simplest definition are pay for performance. So rather than paying for a service, pay for a particular successful or not outcome with risk-adjusted measurements of quality of care tied to reimbursement. Obviously controversial, but also if it can be done right, could be a way to align incentives, and technology is going to be key in implementing such a system if it can be done. And then the last major trend that I think all people watching the US healthcare market should be aware of, or at least that we can talk about today in the time we have, is the consumer shift. The expectation that, like almost every other sector of the US economy, patients should be informed. They should have pricing transparency. They should be able to choose in advance a provider, a sub-provider such as an imaging or a lab technician provider, rather than just going to the place down the hall from their primary care doctor. Technological tools that can make that an integrated part of the experience are being explored and in some cases used. So what's going on in the funding market right now? Triage at the moment. Private equity firms have largely been focused in the last few months on short-term operational needs, while helping healthcare companies assess their medium to long-term needs in the face of deep economic uncertainty. Although, interestingly enough, we see that financial sponsors do have liquidity right now, and there are deals to be done. We keep hearing the phrase, "we are open for business," but that's not to sacrifice quality, and we are hearing an acknowledgement that while there is liquidity, there is a softness in high quality deal flow. So people are being choosy, but we're working with several clients right now on raises and public and private events and milestones. So it can be done. Depends in part on the health of the company and also where they fit into the COVID picture as well. The uncertainty of all these issues, of course, has contributed to the uncertainty of the long-term impact of COVID on debt markets and financial markets. I've heard some people in the U.S. in the economic industry say we think this is going to be a 10-year recovery. Time will tell. M&A was slower. I think someone made a reference to this, 2020 over 2019 for the first half of the year. Several processes are in a holding pattern, but we have seen some improvement in the second half, and people are looking for companies that have been strong enough to weather this, and we're seeing premiums for those companies that have sort of proved their battle testing in this tough environment. The focus for strategic acquirers we've seen is prioritizing operations and supply chain. So the main theme is, what do we need for business continuity? And companies in acquisition mode are really focusing on how can we shore up our internal redundancies and make sure that shocks like this won't disrupt supply. Companies with strong liquidity positions, we believe, are well positioned right now because there are deals to be had, and there will be ships that rise and ships that don't rise in this storm. And so we think there are opportunities to be had. Telehealth I talked about. notable uptick in capital investment and deal volume. Obviously, there's a need for it with the impacts of COVID, and there is supply. There have been a number of emergent telemedicine companies that have radically boosted their prospects with these loosening of regulation. Teladoc is one that we've seen acting most acquisitively. 351 million in 2018 and 600 million in acquisitions in 2020 for their acquisition of InTouch Health. We've talked about the acceleration, and the U.S. federal government has proposed a $200 million program to fund these services for eligible providers, and there are some industry leaders that we can point to. Doctor on Demand, MD Live, PlushCare, 98.6 are some names you may have heard. COVID-specific technologies have driven investment. 3D printing, interestingly enough, with disruptions in supply chain and worries about the integrity of supply chain, a lot of emphasis on 3D printing and the ability to do local manufacturing. We've seen it with PPE, and I will say I have, in fact, personally seen it from garage hobbyists to established companies being able to rapidly deploy manufacturing of new types of products than they normally do to meet emergency supply needs. And of course, FDA has been very flexible with emergency use authorizations, dispensations that allow companies to seek permission to very quickly start producing what would otherwise be regulated devices. And the US has liability protections for people under the PrEP Act and others that are helping with covered countermeasures during a public health emergency. Smartphone tracking, of course, you've all heard of. AI for pattern and signal detection in epidemiology and treatment, and also supply chain logistics. Where do things need to be and when? Trying to skate towards the puck in an epidemic situation. And then, of course, medical virtual reality, another area like telemedicine that we believe and have seen increased interest in as a result of COVID. So I will pause there because we have another speaker who I'm delighted to pass it off to, but it's a pleasure being with you today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Danny, for that insightful presentation. Particularly very thankful for you to be here and able to share your insights on the current trends in the US right now in this area. For our third and final speaker, I have the pleasure of inviting Doron Bahar to speak. He's here to provide us with some insight from an industry perspective. Danny is a serial entrepreneur, an MD in internal medicine, and specializes in critical care medicine and medical genetics. Danny also holds a PhD in population genetics. He is currently the Chief Scientific Officer at Gene by Gene Lab in Houston, Texas, and he is the CEO of Integnify. All yours, Doron.
So thank you very much, Simon and all, for the opportunity to join you and speak a little bit about our startup. I will share my screen, so do let me know if you can see it. So let's take this one and share. Okay. So can you see the presentation now? Can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Yes. Yes,
perfect. So even before I'll tell you a bit about Identify, we are all going now through the genomic revolution, and we all have witnessed the genomic medicine and genomic application rising very fast around us. Identify is really focusing on making genetic counseling available for all, because we are seeing a very narrow bottleneck with our ability to reach genetic counselors, and I will speak about it a bit later. But even before this, so I was asked to say things about the CEO's perspective and what happened in a startup who is facing the coronavirus. The startup is in digital health, not dealing specifically with COVID-19. So this is what we have done since COVID-19 arrived. So we were able to raise $12.5 million. We were able to sign 3 collaboration agreements, with two very large vendors in the US. Among which two are large vendors in the US. We deployed in 3 new sites. We submitted and received authorization for a pilot in our field in the US. We released a new and full version of our software, and we actually were expanding our team from 35 individuals prior to COVID-19 to 45. So I cannot say that COVID-19 blocked us. I can certainly say that even some good things have happened, but naturally one has to also ask what we have not been doing since COVID-19 started, to be very realistic. So we did not attend our offices. We actually gave our offices back, which of course reduced costs on our end, but we start seeing some moral issues. Initially, there was a euphoria. People said, oh, we can go working from home, specifically the engineers that are, that needs a computer and a screen to be able to work. So this euphoria has been a little bit attenuated because people do need more than a screen. They need to meet each other. And we just were expecting to have our Rosh Hashanah, a gathering 2 days from now. We had to cancel it again because of the situation. So we can see that some people do have some issues with working from home and so on. And this is a subject that I think we will all have to be dealing with in the coming years until we understand what is the balance between work and office and how to keep everybody safe while coming to the office. We have not been able to travel out of Israel. So naturally we had less meetings with customers, and we actually had to change the profile of our US presence. So when just before COVID-19, we were starting to recruit our VP sale, and understanding that we are not going to travel to the US, we have actually changed the position of the lead contact in the US to a manager, a general manager that will be able to create his own team and start expanding within clients in the US. So that has also caused, of course, a change. Then we have not met our expected revenues. So at the beginning of COVID-19, we really received some calls from the largest vendor we were dealing with, saying that they are basically blocked because of COVID-19, because their inability to market, but more than this, because they turned all of their efforts into COVID-19 tests. So that has made a change, but I can tell you that we are still during the COVID-19 a pandemic, and we see that correction is being noticed now. We see more and more leads are coming to play, and we see like as if the world has learned how to live with COVID-19. It seems as if many of the manufacturers and the lab providers of COVID-19 testings have succeeded to answer the challenge to produce more samples per day, more reagents, and so on and so on. And now they are turning back again into expanding their genomics offering, which we are clearly seeing. We have also not panicked, but we certainly did not remain indifferent to the situation. So I would say that COVID-19 is not certainly not terrible for our business. On the contrary, it might be very good, certainly as we're seeing now. And there were things that have been changing. So I think that different from other businesses, some of them I'm involved with. So for example, the lab I'm involved with in Houston, Texas, started to be part of the answer to COVID-19 testings. So naturally, COVID-19 revenues time revenues are increasing because there are more offers for COVID-19. Identify is a digital health company in the field of the genomics. And I think that we are experiencing now some very positive waves, some a lot of will from customers to engage into digital health solutions because of the COVID-19 situation and because of the need to supply demand while face-to-face meetings are basically not there. And with this, I'm going to let you know a little bit about Identify so that you can understand why do we see this trend and why do we feel it's going to grow up. So as I said, we all live through the genomic revolution. The genomic revolution means very, very basically that the price of the genome went down from $2.5 billion to less than $1,000. That makes genomic testing or the genome a very clear potential to be included in the medical records of each of us in the coming decade or less or a bit more. We also see in the blue line the huge increase in customers, so customers were mentioned before, of a direct to consumers reach for genetic testing, specifically in the fields of ancestry of lifestyle. But you can see that fully 30 million Americans have already put a DNA sample in one of 4 big companies supplying this. So we do see that the trend is there and people do want to know what their genome can do for them. But we also know that worldwide, there are only 7,000 genetic counselors, which is a ridiculous number of individuals that are in charge of being the translators of the genomic data to the patients. And we know that each patient will have to meet the genetic counselors a few times throughout his lifetime around reproductive health, around pharmacogenomics, around cancer risk, around cardiac risk, and so on and so on. So we have seen this, and we said that in view of this huge demand for genetic counseling and the very narrow number of genetic counselors available to supply it, we should trust in digital technology to answer this unmet need. And we believe that the future of genetic counseling is in technology by allowing each genetic counselor to supervise many, many more patients, because in most cases, the risk will be low and it can be explained by a machine. So we have generated a digital genetic counselor assistant, which is a completely digitalized and machine generated. And our aim is to answer for this need. As mentioned here before, in medicine generally, there is a need to scale on the operation, to scale on our need to explain to patients and so on. But in the same time, we're speaking about the need for more personalization. So how do you scale up and maintain your personalization? So the way we look at it is that a machine that can actually talk to the patient and do exactly what a genetic counselor have instructed that will happen if this and that rule have been fulfilled, to actually allow us to take all the plethora of information that the genetic counselor needs to know and need to be updated with and deliver it eventually to the referring physician and the patients. So that was the power, and that is becoming very visible. So the platform actually creates a proprietary database of both clinical and genomic information, allowing the patient to get their onboarding experience at the comfort of their home using digital sorting algorithms, and also multimedia-based, personalized and dynamic consenting processes, so that they are able to actually register, receive the information, and sign for a test that they want to do. Following this, the system has a module of an analytic model, which is basically bioinformatics, so how to take the raw data and interpret it. Then we have the insight module that takes the clinical information, takes the genetic information, merge them together, and comes up with suggestions for the patients according to those 2 data sets. And then at the end, we have the counsel module, which again takes an approach of being able to use machine-generated items to deliver to patients results back in different languages, in a different message for each patient, depending on what happened, again, using the same current UX tool of personalized and dynamic multimedia content. And with this, I actually summarized for the purpose of our conversation, what are the trends and momentum that we see in global healthcare with relation to digital trends? So I would say that patients want on-demand healthcare. They don't want to wait 3 months for an appointment with a genetic counseling, certainly not a year, which is many times the case. They want it on demand. They request personalization. They request to know, what does it mean for me? Naturally, big data analytics has been discussed here, and that is a big part of healthcare today. because we can learn from the big data to improve our healthcare status and our offering to patients. Then we think that machine-generated patient counseling to support scale-up is key. Many people forget that when the average age of the population is increasing from 70 to 75, there's 3 times more need for medical assistance. The budget actually, that is the numbers that were calculated for the local market in Israel, 3 times more for this longevity, which is blessed, but of course has its medical needs with it. Then we think that precision and preventive healthcare are becoming more and more important. Naturally, genomic medicine is a pillar to both of them because we can learn from our genome on our risk for cancer, for example, and take action measures to prevent it. And naturally, at the end, AI usage to accelerate discovery and improve accuracy of giving answers to patients is, of course, a key component to digital health. So I would summarize that overall, we at Agentify actually feel very encouraged with the trends and momentum of digital health due to the COVID-19, despite not being directly at the COVID-19 a scene. Naturally, such system can also be used to generate reports and submit them in message to the to COVID-19 companies who are testing individuals. But again, in our field of genomics, we do see that people are much more acceptance to digital health and to the next step beyond telemedicine. Telemedicine still mandates a medical professional in the other side of the line. Here, we try to move it all to the machine, still supervised by a genetic counselor. So thank you very much for your attending and for listening. And I'll bring back the screen to you guys. Here it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doron. That was great. We're really appreciative of you able to give us kind of a window into what's going on in your company during these difficult times. And even some of us in different fields definitely relate to a lot of the points that you were raising. I think we've used our allotted time. I didn't see any questions. So I guess if anybody has any questions, you can certainly get in touch with us or the folks at DLA, and we'll be happy to, to direct your questions to wherever you want them. I believe also this presentation was recorded, so if anybody wants to get a copy, I'm sure we can facilitate that as well. So I guess just thank you very much to all the panelists for your very insightful and fascinating contributions today. I guess what I wish all of us is, first of all, we love obviously doing events like this with our friends at DLA, although it's very comfortable and easy to do it from the comfort of my own home. I wish all of us the hope that next year, maybe before Rosh Hashanah, we can do an event together in person, live, back the way we used to do it. So just wishing everybody here, panelists and non-panelists alike, a Shana Tova and Happy New Year.
And just quickly to add, first of all, Simon, thank you so much for emceeing and for hosting, and really just wanted to reiterate Simon's thank yous to all of our panelists, and just hoping that this year brings all of us, good health, peace, happiness, only good things for everybody. And, even though here in Israel we're going into a lockdown, hopefully 3 weeks from now we'll come out much stronger and in a much better place. So just chazak v'ematz, as they said in this past week's Torah portion, right? Just hold strong, and hopefully things will get better. Shana Tova to everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you. Shana Tova.
Thank
Bye, everyone.
you.
Bye.
Shana Tova.
Bye.
Cheers.